My name is Justin, and this quarter I decided to tackle the question, what is gentrification? So over the past 9 weeks, I've explored the positive and negative effects of gentrification and really tried to find if there are any alternative solutions to gentrification that maximize the good and minimize the bad. So the three important points I want to make for my presentation are that gentrification does not help in its current form, that mixed income housing, which is the alternative that I found, can help, but further research must be done on the topic before it can be implemented on a widespread basis. So to segue into my research, basically I studied 3 case neighborhoods and a bunch of different statistics about these neighborhoods that all implemented the mixed income housing development. And so these three neighborhoods were Melrose Avenue in the Bronx in New York City, Old North in St. Louis, Missouri, and Dudley Street in Boston, Massachusetts. However, before going into this research, I want to make sure that you guys all understand what gentrification actually is. So in order to do that, I'm going to take you back to my hometown of Washington, D.C. So this was the corner of Florida Avenue and 14th Street in the U Street neighborhood of Washington, D.C. back in 2003. So just an abandoned warehouse, not really much going on, not too much of a great neighborhood. And in 2007, this building was demolished, and that was kind of right in the middle of all the U Street redevelopment. And this was built in its place. This is a luxury condo complex called View 14, which was opened in 2009 with some of the highest aggregate rents in the Washington, D.C. area at $2,900 a month. Yeah, so obviously it's a big change in a very short amount of time, but this was a little bit better in terms of gentrification because it wasn't displacing anyone. It was just tearing down an abandoned warehouse where nobody was living. But most of these redevelopment projects are tearing down low-income neighborhoods to build these places. So the developers are using gentrification as a way to revitalize these failing neighborhoods. So how I was able to actually assess the benefits was to look at the percent of residents below the poverty line and how that changed. And from 1980 to 2010, that number decreased from 33% to 16%. And also I assessed the percent of residents without a high school diploma, and that number dropped from 47% of residents to only 8% in about 30 years. So if this was really all that was going on, gentrification would be a success, and this would be the end of my presentation. But there's a lot more going on under the surface. So the following video, which will work this time, is an excerpt from the Al Jazeera documentary, There Goes the Neighborhood, which chronicles gentrification throughout the city of Washington, D.C. And this clip specifically is one of the researchers going into a low-income housing project that is about to be torn down and talking to one of the families to kind of understand their situation.
The life of the community before it disappears and is replaced by a new neighborhood.
And so you spent almost 40 years here. Wow. Barry Farm is changing. And there's a lot of feelings about how this community is changing.
And I don't want to go.
You don't want to go?
I literally don't want to go.
What are you doing to fight this?
There's nothing that we can't do. There's nothing.
Like what government they say they gonna do, they do that look like they got all control.
So for those of you that couldn't quite hear what she was saying, the quote at the end was, "There's nothing that we can do, what can we do?" And I feel this quote really just encapsulates the kind of feelings of these residents that are living in these low-income neighborhoods because they don't have the money or political power to fight this gentrification in these neighborhoods. And so specifically, to kind of assess the changes of gentrification in these neighborhoods, I looked at the movement of the African American and white populations because in DC, those are the 2 largest populations. There's not much Hispanic or Asian. And so if there's a lot of movement there, that's definitely showing there's a lot of change in residents. So for U Street demographics, in the same time period from 1980 to 2010, the percent of African Americans dropped from 95% to only 22%. And the white population increased from only 4% in 1980 to 61% in 2010. So again, a lot of change in 30 years. And so those benefits that we were seeing before are not helping those low-income residents, namely the African-American residents that were there. and instead they're just new residents coming in and changing the face of the neighborhood. So developers are understanding that what they're trying to fix is actually not happening, and instead they're just moving the problem to someplace else. So they've been searching for a lot of redevelopment alternatives, and one of the ones I happened to find was mixed income housing. So mixed income housing uses a three-pronged approach, where the first piece is to retain the low-income residents in those neighborhoods, to really make sure that they can stay there, are not being displaced, and really experience all the benefits that can come from redevelopment. Second is to bring in middle-class residents to these neighborhoods to provide a little bit of economic stimulation for businesses, to provide tax dollars for schools and hospitals, and to just really also act as role models for those low-income residents. And the third and most important piece is cooperation with the community. And so in terms of gentrification, it's usually developers coming in and with an idea of what they want to do to improve the community, and just imposing it with not too much talk with the residents themselves or even political leaders in the area. Whereas with mixed income housing, the community organizes a coalition that works with developers step by step all the way through the whole process, and not just assessing the housing situation, but like I said before, assessing the situation with schools, how they can improve local businesses and get the whole community kind of up on its feet. And so, again, the three communities that I looked at that all implemented this mixed income housing approach was Melrose Avenue in the Bronx, Old North in St. Louis, Missouri, and Dudley Street in Boston, Massachusetts. So first, I looked at the percent change in population. There we go. Percent change in population in each of these neighborhoods. And so basically this graph chronicles that percent change with, say, 0.2 being a 20% increase and negative 0.2 being a 20% decrease. And then each of these colors represents a population in the neighborhood. So for example, for Melrose Avenue, blacks are orange, and it saw not too much of a change, about a 15% decrease, whereas the white population and the Hispanic population each saw about a 15% increase. So overall, not too much change, not too drastic. In the case of Old North, they actually saw about a 30% increase in the African American population and almost a 50% decrease in the white population. And in the case of Dudley Street, not too much change with blacks and whites, but an almost 40% increase of Hispanics. So what's really important to know about this is Melrose, not much change. In Old North, more blacks coming in and whites leaving. And Dudley Street, not much change for blacks and whites, but a significant increase for Hispanics. And so what that translates to, and some of the benefits, for the percent of residents without a high school diploma, all three neighborhoods saw a significant drop. Melrose dropped from 61% to 44%, Old North 60 to 40%, and Dudley Street from 40 to 27%. And so each saw great gains in that realm. And then in terms of change in median household income, Melrose saw an increase of about $1,000. Old North saw an increase of about $4,000, and Dudley Street saw an increase of about $8,000 in median household income. And when you compare that with the change in population, it's really interesting to note that Melrose, which didn't have much change in terms of like racial changes in the population, they didn't see that many benefits. They still definitely benefited from mixed income housing, but it wasn't as pronounced as, say, Dudley Street, which in that case actually saw a large increase of Hispanics. And so it's definitely very interesting to note that as more minorities are coming in with this mixed income housing development, we're actually seeing more benefits rather than less. And so, although all of the research that I had done was very short-term kind of research, because all of these mixed income housing developments were built within the last 10 years. And so all of this data is from the last 10 years, and it's very short-term. But future research must be done to really assess the long-term benefits and also the long-term costs, just to make sure that it doesn't go the route of gentrification where there are negative impacts that we just aren't seeing yet. And even more importantly, further research must be done to actually link gentrification with mixed income housing. I was doing a lot of research with gentrification, and it took me a long time to even stumble across mixed income housing. And when I finally did find it, there still wasn't many kind of research just linking the two. But once I started researching specifically mixed income housing, there was a lot of research on the kind of social individual goals of it. I found this quote from the researcher Aaron M. Graves, who had done a decent amount of research on mixed income housing. And I feel it, well, again, really encapsulates the research that is being done on this, and that mixed income developments can be used to achieve the social goals of reducing negative behavior, improving local services, enhancing social control, and developing social capital, although all of these will likely be limited. And so again, this really kind of personifies the research in that no one is really looking at it on a larger community base and how it can help a community or a neighborhood or even a city as a whole. And so that's definitely the one thing I really want to push in my presentation, is to get developers, researchers, community leaders to start thinking of mixed income housing as a way not to just help one person, but to help a whole bunch of people. So to wrap up, again, my 3 main points, that gentrification in its current form does not help. It does not solve any problems, it just moves the problem to somewhere else. Mixed income housing from my research can definitely help in the short term, but further research must be done to assess that if it can be beneficial in the long term, and then also further research must be done to link gentrification and mixed income housing, to really link the two to make sure that people understand that mixed income housing is possibly a feasible solution. Thank you.